urgent! Trump's right-hand man has raised a political axe over his head. Rubio is throwing Donald out of his seat. Trump no longer controls his own army. Donald's power is melting before our eyes. Moscow is surrounded by a ring of fire. Putin is hiding behind machine guns. The Kremlin has been turned into a fortress. But for the Ukrainian armed forces, there are no obstacles. The surprise is already in the sky, right in the middle of the parade. Red Square is turning into a field of vengeance. The Caucasian trap is closing. Armenia is switching to Ukraine's side. Zelensky's clever move in Yerevan. Putin is furious. Russia is losing its last ally. All this in our episode. The boiling point. A coup in the White House. Marco Rubio knocks Trump out of his seat. The president's rating plunges into the abyss. Donald's associates are choosing a new leader. Rubio is preparing the final blow. While Trump's power is falling apart at the seams, Rubio is hot on his heels with unprecedented strength. How is Donald's right-hand man preparing to become America's new leader? Watch.
Trump is no longer in vogue. The new favorite of Republicans and many Americans is Marco Rubio. Hasn't the Secretary of State recently increased his ratings almost 12-fold and is becoming perhaps the main competitor?
This formal message is being addressed directly to the President of the United States himself, specifically regarding his own personal actions and the various policies he has implemented.
Presidential ambitions are not yet widely publicized, but the numbers speak for themselves. According to the results of opinion polls, in a hypothetical election today, Rubio would receive 35% of the votes. Only the Vice President Pence has more, with 53%. However, the latter always and in everything supports Trump, so a drop in the president's ratings could drag him down as well. And Jay Defense, you
understand that his support is fading, his MAGA supporters are fighting among themselves, Republicans are running to the Democrats, not because the Democrats are wonderful, but because Trump is terrible. Democrats are winning in practically every election.
Understanding this, Marco Rubio is already trying to distance himself from the current White House policies. For example, on the issue of the war in Ukraine, he is against essentially the capitulation that the US is trying to impose on Kyiv.
The only American official, the key American official who does not support the Witkoff and Kushner plan is Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Analysts believe that this, in particular, increases Rubio's popularity. After all, according to polls, the majority of Americans side with Ukraine and are also against Washington putting pressure on Kyiv.
Rubio opposes Witkoff and Kushner, stating that the priority is security guarantees for Ukraine, not business deals, not giving up Donetsk, and not weakening Ukraine from a military standpoint. The priority is security guarantees. So Marco Rubio is still resisting Witkoff, Kushner, and the person behind them, Vice President J.D. Vance.
At the same time, Marco Rubio is almost the only one who continues to push the idea of putting pressure on Russia. He is the one advocating for tougher sanctions against Moscow, which has earned him the support of a segment of Trump's electorate who didn't appreciate the handshake in Anchorage with a war criminal.
Scott Bessent is the finance minister who is developing sanction ideas. And together with Senator Marco Rubio, they are, you could even say, the most prominent foreign policy hawks within the current American administration.
At the same time, not being foolish, Rubio has never openly opposed Trump, Vance, or their circle. However, cunning Marco always leaves himself a loophole. He claims that he is a public servant and therefore must adhere to the state policy dictated by the president.
He is the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and he constantly emphasizes that he is implementing it in practice. The decisions of this president, he is implementing the decisions of this White House.
But it is now impossible to ignore the division within American society. Against the backdrop of economic difficulties inside the US due to the war in Iran and issues such as the killing of migrants by Trump's IC squads, more and more Republicans want a competent and predictable president. And if one does not choose the Democrats, Rubio is probably the most obvious candidate.
Right now, we are in a state of a rather cold war, with our current government actively attempting to completely turn this country upside down in order to make us a strategic ally of the Russian Federation. And this situation in itself, even more so than the conflict in Ukraine, deeply worries and profoundly unsettles the people here. A great many Americans, because there are certain things that trigger an emotional response. And friendship with Russia is very strange for America.
No less strange is the sudden hostility toward Europe. It seems that's exactly what it's for. Within a week, Rubio will travel to Rome to smooth over conflicts with the Pope that Trump had started. And if everything goes well, this will further boost the Secretary of State's popularity among American voters.
Moscow is in panic, Putin is hiding behind machine guns, and the Kremlin is surrounded by air defense systems. All across Russia, the last remaining systems are being pulled into Moscow, leaving the regions unprotected. But the Ukrainian armed forces are already taking aim. A surprise for Putin is ready. While marches are being rehearsed on Red Square, Ukrainian Avenger drones are already plotting a course to the grandstand. The final countdown for the Kremlin has begun. Watch for the details.
Hooray! Putin did it! He managed to turn the May 9th parade from a Russian triumph into a march of shame and fear.
A clash with neo-Nazis and Banderites, whom the US and their junior partners have backed, will be inevitable. Russia delivered a preemptive response to the aggression.
Ukrainian birds are flying over the center of the Russian capital. Listen, oh, right there it is. It is hovering directly right above my house. Just look at that incredible sight right now. And the closer it gets to the parade, the scarier it becomes.
This will be the first time in many, many years, if this is really the case, that they cannot afford to have weaponry present at the parade. And Ukrainian drones might also fly over this parade?
Air defense systems are being brought to the Russian capital from Kazan and Grozny to protect the parade, and they plan to create several layers of defense.
Can you imagine? It's a nightmare. But that's not all.
Security measures are in place around the entire capital. There are checkpoints at the entrances. Access to Red Square is blocked. And right next to the Kremlin, there are armored vehicles and SUVs. And on the walls and towers of the Kremlin, there are machine gunners. Just look at the Spasskaya Tower of the Kremlin. A security officer with a machine gun? Putin couldn't have imagined, even in his worst nightmares, that there would literally be people with guns on every tower, wall, and even just on buildings. In the Kremlin, special forces operatives will be stationed with machine guns, sniper rifles, and special equipment, all just to make sure Ukrainian drones don't reach the bunker dweller. The systems that were set up on the rooftops of high-rise buildings turned out to be largely ineffective, and Muscovites are fleeing the city en masse.
Against the backdrop of this terrorist threat, of course, all measures are being taken to minimize the danger.
Take a look. These are the consequences of a Ukrainian drone hitting a high-rise in Moscow. Just 5 days before the parade and only 6 kilometers from the Kremlin. As we can see, the air defense systems that were hastily pulled into the city center in a panic didn't help. It blew up just like that. 1. 2. As it turned out, the Ukrainian FP-1 made it through 3 layers of air defense, and on this map there are 101 confirmed air defense positions, while the route itself passed through the area of responsibility of at least 10 regiments. S-400, that's right. As well as dozens of Panzer and Tor systems, which the bunker dweller was so proud of. At the same time, memes about preparations for May 9th are actively spreading online. Ukrainians are joking about heightened security measures and creating funny images. So, from "we'll defeat Ukraine" in 2 days to "the war has reached the very capital of the Russian Federation." And while Ukrainians are laughing at this absurdity, Putin is tearfully begging Ukraine for a truce on May 9th.
It's like imagining Stalin, who in a phone conversation with President Roosevelt suggests to Hitler to arrange a truce on the 7th of November in honor of the great holiday. Even Vitaly Aviryanov, the deputy chairman of the Borsky Club, said, "How is that supposed to work?" It's ambiguous. On May 9th, it seems the topic of the denazification of Ukraine was raised. Supposedly there are heirs of Nazism there, and to call on the spiritual heirs of Nazism to agree to a truce by May 9th.
Back at the beginning of April, the Kremlin dictator was informed about the dangers of holding the May parade. Pro-war blogger Ilya Tumanov on Fight Bomber said that the authorities were discussing where exactly to hold the parade in Moscow or
the historic city of St. Petersburg, which is often referred to as the cultural capital of Russia, is located on the shores of the Baltic Sea. And what activities and events will be taking place on the square and in the surrounding areas? Such a significant blow in terms of media impact. I even think that maybe nothing will actually reach there, but something still needs to be done.
The parade rehearsal has not yet been announced, although it is usually held at the end of April. It always started in Alabino, but even in the training ground group, where the preparations are covered every year, there is nothing except for the reduction of part of the event. In
accomplishing strategic objectives, in effectively addressing the task for the sake of Russia, its greatness and prosperity.
Glory to the victorious people.
Putin has demilitarized the victory parade. According to the statement from the Ministry of Defense, there will be no heavy equipment, which has always been present at the parade. Only will march in the column cadets.
Cadets from Suvorov Military and Nakimov Schools Cadet Corps, as well as a column of military vehicles. Due to the current operational situation, they will not participate in the military parade this year. In
the passages on Tverskaya Street, they put up supports just for show. They always fenced off the road for the passage of heavy vehicles.
Red Square is being intensively prepared for viruses, but the number of guests has been greatly reduced. This is evident from the stands. As for the dress rehearsal, the announced date was May 4th. But these dates keep changing. And
the sky will be closed. At most, that's what Russians will see this year. These are the Swifts, who used to always participate in the aerial part of the victory parade. But for now, their shows are being reconsidered. In Moscow, mobile internet shutdowns are planned for the May holidays.
Everything is going according to plan, 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 simply according to plan, right on schedule.
Only a small number of leaders will come to the parade. They realize that this year, without Xi Jinping as an umbrella, the Kremlin is especially vulnerable. As we can see, Putin is trying to avoid public humiliation. But as we can see, he's not doing a very good job of it.
Trump is losing America, his ratings have plunged into the abyss, and the people are demanding change. The path to impeachment is open, and Washington is on the brink of a great upheaval. The latest poll has revealed all the cards. Is the White House really facing a new removal procedure that will erase Trump from politics forever? Watch this.
Donald Trump reportedly quite nearly had a stroke. The American billionaire who so desperately wanted to go down in US history as the greatest president of all time will be remembered by the world as one of the worst.
Thank you very much.
Trump's ratings are going down the drain. There can be no talk of a third term or any further successful political career. Many analysts claim that Donald will not be able to hold on to the presidency even until the end of his official term.
Here you can see that the approval rating has dropped to 37% in this poll. That's 2 points lower than the last time we conducted the survey. How is that time different from today? Of course, it's the beginning of the Iranian war, which is still ongoing. It seems this is hurting Trump politically.
Hurting is putting it mildly.
The vast majority of people say that, in their opinion, the country is moving in the wrong direction. Many of them point to the economy, saying they are well aware of the price of gasoline and the price of groceries. And these are people, many of whom are working in the labor market. Ordinary Americans.
More than half of Americans have a strongly negative attitude toward both the war against Iran started by Trump and the current White House policy. It was precisely the conflict between Washington and Tehran that became the last straw for voters.
He is waging a war that is extremely unpopular. 2/3 of the country either strongly disapprove or to some extent disapprove of what he is trying to do. These are not the conditions under which an American president can successfully lead a war.
As of today, even the most ardent Trump supporters disagree with the current president's policies. Even Tucker Carlson himself had an epiphany on the eve of what Donald Trump is doing.
I and everyone else who supported him, you wrote speeches for him. I ran his campaign. We are definitely involved in this. It's not enough to just say, well, I've changed my mind, or, oh, this is bad, I'm leaving. In fact, I and millions of people like me are the reason for what is happening right now.
Imagine the frustration of a die-hard American propagandist. He even dared to publicly apologize for once supporting Trump.
I want to say that I apologize for misleading people, and it was unintentional.
Even his own party has recently started opposing Trump. Republicans and their voters are already fed up with the antics of the American billionaire.
A quarter of those who call themselves Republicans are among those dissatisfied with how the president is handling the Iran issue. This is what defined the story of his second term: inflation and the rising cost of living.
Against this backdrop, talk of a possible impeachment is growing louder and more frequent. Mass protests and criticism over the economic situation and foreign policy are increasing the pressure on the White House. Under these circumstances, the Democrats, who have never liked Trump, might try to use the president's declining support as a reason to initiate impeachment proceedings. And according to analysts, their chances are high. After all, more and more Republicans are joining the ranks of those who oppose the current US president's actions.
Right now, the summit in Yerevan is a verdict for the Russian Federation. Zelensky gathered the most powerful contingent of Western leaders right in the very heart of Armenia. A geopolitical checkmate for Putin, this is Yerevan's final break with Moscow. What did the leaders secretly agree on, and what deadly trap for Putin have they prepared in the Caucasus? Find out.
Another blow to the dictator. Putin's geopolitical plans are facing failure.
The ancient and beautiful nation of Armenia, all located in the Caucasus region,
is changing its course. European leaders are gathering for two unprecedented summits in Yerevan, which for a long time was considered Russia's closest ally in the South Caucasus. Also on Sunday, the president of Ukraine arrived in the Armenian capital. Volodymyr Zelensky has already held a series of meetings with the heads of government of Norway, Finland, the United Kingdom, and the Czech Republic. The Ukrainian leader is using this opportunity to discuss with European partners further military assistance to Kyiv and the prospects for negotiations to end the Russian-Ukrainian war.
We need to focus on what we will do if Russia does not end this war. We need to keep up the pressure, and we need peace. And of course, that's number one. We need to find a workable diplomatic format. Europe must be at the table for any negotiations.
Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the capital of Armenia was unprecedented. His participation in the summit and his speech alongside Prime Minister Pashinyan, a powerful signal to Putin that the Caucasus is no longer the Kremlin's backyard.
In the past, they used to exert significant control over Armenia. Today, they continue to dominate several key sectors of the entire national economy. The Russian Federation's military base. And just imagine what a blow this is, what a slap in the face, especially right before May 9th, a sacred date for Putin, when Zelensky arrives at the Summit of Strategic Partnership.
For the first time, a country that for decades was Russia's most important military ally in the Caucasus is hosting the leaders of nearly 50 European states. This is a clear demonstration of a new direction, from Moscow to Brussels. This is the first bilateral EU summit in Armenia's history, which will be attended by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa.
By holding a summit at such a high level, Europe is prioritizing security specifically in Armenia, but it is also sending a strong signal to the countries of the Near East, the Turkish Gulf, and most importantly, of course, to the Russian Federation, that its spheres of influence, as Putin dreamed of restoring, like those that existed during the Soviet Union, this is already absolutely For him, this is an unmanageable and unrealistic task.
Russia's inability to fulfill the role of security guarantor has led to a logical outcome. Armenia is moving towards Europe. This is further evidence that the post-Soviet space is no longer a monopoly playground for the Kremlin.
Putin's influence in the South Caucasus has significantly weakened since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine. The resources that Putin can accumulate for the spread of his own policy has narrowed considerably. And we see this not only in the Caucasus, but also in Central Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. For Putin, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine became a pivotal and transformative turning point that drastically and permanently diminished his standing as an influential figure on the global political stage.
Relations between Russia and Armenia are experiencing a deep crisis. After the CSTO refused to help Armenia during the conflicts with Azerbaijan, Yerevan began to distance itself from Moscow. For Putin, this means yet another painful blow to his ambitions to maintain control.
He maintained a truly commanding and remarkably imposing presence that allowed him to stand as a dominant figure, towering over all the people in his neighborhood and asserting a sense of clear authority over his neighbors. It effectively provides all of those specific benefits that can be successfully delivered by a powerful state that acts as a dominant regional hegemon.
The summit on May 4th through 5th becomes a turning point, a point of no return, where Armenia is effectively trading in Russia's hollow guarantees for real integration into the Western security and economic architecture. The collapse of Putin's offensive, April became a month of disgrace for the Russian Federation. The Russian army is not capturing but losing territory? A deadly trap for Gerasimov. The Russian army is nervous and resorting to a desperate infiltration tactic. But the Ukrainian armed forces have already seized the initiative. Why is this the beginning of the end for the enemy? Watch. Instead of the loudly announced major offensive, retreat, and loss of position, April 2026, a month the Russian command will try to forget. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the occupiers not only failed to advance, but also lost approximately 116 square kilometers of territory. This is the worst result since August 2024, during the time of the Kursk operation with the Ukrainian armed forces.
The level of combat engagements at the moment remains practically at the same lines as a year ago. This means that the defense forces of Ukraine not only stopped further advances by the occupiers, but also successfully counterattacked in several sectors of the front. We are talking about the successful actions of the defense forces of Ukraine in the areas of Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions.
The statistics speak for themselves. The average speed of advance of Russian troops has dropped to almost 3 square kilometers per day. A year ago, this figure was 3 times higher, almost 10. And over the past 6 months, Russia has managed to capture only 1,443 square kilometers, compared to more than 2,360 during the same period last year.
In other words, the pace of the offensive hasn't just slowed down, it has collapsed. There are several reasons for this. First, the strikes by the defense forces of Ukraine on enemy depots, headquarters, and logistics. Second, problems with communications. Restrictions on access to Starlink in the occupied territories and the Kremlin's control over Telegram have significantly complicated the coordination of units.
The defense forces of Ukraine are successfully holding back the advance of the occupiers in the Pokrovsk direction. The offensive by the occupiers in this section of the front has already been ongoing for more than 18 months.
But Russia is trying to convince people otherwise. One of their tactics is the so-called gray zones. Territories where there is no stable control are presented as captured. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War emphasize that Russia's actual control is much less than what its propaganda claims. Meanwhile, the very tactics of combat are also changing. As reported by the British publication The Telegraph, Russia is gradually abandoning mass assault tactics, the so-called meat grinder approach. The meat grinder tactic, which resulted in enormous losses. Instead, the enemy is switching to a different tactic. Small groups of 2 to 4 soldiers, sometimes even lone soldiers, advance on foot, often at night, with minimal radio communication. Their task is to find weak spots in the defense, infiltrate deep into the positions unnoticed, and establish themselves there. Experts note that such groups are harder to detect and eliminate than larger units. Despite attempts to adapt, the key trend for Russia remains negative. The effectiveness of the offensive has been declining for several months in a row, ever since April 2025.
Despite all the statements from the Russian side, political, military, and at the highest levels, about full control over Kupiansk and the Kupiansk area, these settlements remain under the control of non-occupying forces, namely the Ukrainian Defense Forces.
An additional blow to the enemy comes from Ukrainian attacks on economic and logistical infrastructure. Recently, vessels of the so-called Shadow Fleet near Novorossiysk were struck. These ships were used to circumvent sanctions and export oil. And while the Kremlin tries to hide its failure, the front increasingly reveals the real picture. Russia is losing momentum, territory, and initiative.
That's all from us for now. This was Yarina Tazlanova with you. Even more scorching news from the front in our next broadcast. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. See you soon.